Hello, and welcome back to Anchor Waves. I am your host and only host, Dr. Eunice Menja, an LMFT candidate. I'm an educator, life coach, mentor, mother, wife, and a student of both science and faith. So before we begin, I'd like to give a quick disclaimer that this podcast is not therapy. So the stories that I'm going to be sharing are drawn from my life experiences, some research that I have come across, and lessons I have learned, not from my past or current clients. This is for education, reflection, and encouragement purpose only. So somebody might ask, what is the episode for going to cover, or why does this matter today? I have been reflecting this past birthday weekend. By the way, I just turned a little bit over 50. Looking back for the last 50 plus years of lessons, and one major lesson, I keep circling back to it. This is something that comes up all the time when I'm doing therapy with my clients or even mentorship. I also listen to myself because sometimes I do listen to myself. You can serve, okay? You can be selfless. You can love others deeply. But you don't have to burn yourself just to keep others warm. And that last part is what I am going to cover in this episode. Let's talk about something that people shy away from talking about, because I'm going to talk about it. Let's talk about people pleasing. I'm going to talk about where this comes from in my life, why it traps most of us, how it is harmful, and how to anchor ourselves so that we can love others without losing ourselves. But before I go on, I want you to anchor yourself. So go ahead and grab your favorite drink. It could be coffee, it could be tea, it could be chai, it could be Coke, whatever that needs to anchor you. Sit down, relax, get a blanket. We are going to be talking about people pleasing today. So picture this. Life without an anchor is like being on the ocean without direction. The waves of, our family expectations, our culture, the pressure that we get from the society, the demands that blow us in every direction. When we are not properly anchored, we end up saying yes to everyone, but no to ourselves. Listening more to others than to our own hearts. We end up putting ourselves last. We are seeking belonging after rejection and abandonment. It feels noble. It's actually self-destructive. I'm here to tell you that. Yes, it's a noble cause to answer yes to everything and to everyone and to listen to other people's needs and to be a servant, but it can also be self-destructive. And here is how. So let's talk about where this people-pleasing comes from. And I'm going to talk about where people-pleasing comes from on my behalf. Okay? For me, people-pleasing started right when I was a child. I thought if my mom was hurt, it must have been because she didn't do everything right. So I tried harder as her first daughter. I wanted to cover her. I wanted to cover her bad behavior, in quotes. Being good, hoping maybe I could stop the chaos in my own home. And then when I went to school, it was the same. Only the top students were celebrated in front of the whole parade or the gym, whatever you call it, depending on where you come from. The ones who failed were punished in front of everyone. the kind of public shaming that teaches you early when you're a child that worth equals performance. So at home, conflict wasn't resolved with calm words, it exploded. A small disagreement could turn into what felt like a full-blown war. So as a child, I learned that conflict was dangerous. The safest strategy was to avoid conflict at all cost. And you know what? And avoiding conflict grows, that's what grows into people pleasing. So I am going to give full disclosure that conflict to me sometimes is a trigger. Let's be honest. Many of us still carry this trigger. Even as adults, a small disagreement can send our bodies into panic mode. It's like Pavlov's, dog, that theory, when they rang a bell and the dogs started salivating because they expected food. For us human beings, conflict can be the bell, and the chaos, that send us into shock. Now, even a minor complaint to me sometimes can feel like an explosion is waiting to happen. I want to give an example. A coworker says to me, this report, or my supervisor says this report is missing a page. And you know what happens to me? Suddenly my whole body reacts as if world war is about to break out. Instead of calmly saying to my supervisor, thanks, I'm gonna add that page, I am going to rush in with my protective gear and I'm gonna say, okay, I'm gonna stay late. I want to fix everything. I'm gonna do everything everyone wants me to do. Just don't get upset. That is my trauma speaking. I don't want to be rejected. I don't want to upset people. So I'm going to avoid conflict. And I'm going to do everything that I can do to protect myself. That's not reasoning. That is reacting. Avoiding conflict sometimes feels safe, but unresolved pain, on the other hand, grows bigger. And over time, it's going to hurt more than facing conflict ever would. So before I go further, I'm going to describe 3 types of people pleasers. So stay right there with me. So part of my readings and part of my education, or just from what I have seen in life, research in therapy room, and there are these 3 main types of people pleasers, and I'm going to start with the peacemaker or the peacekeeper. So what the peacekeeper does is the peacekeeper is going to avoid conflict at all costs, even if the peacekeeper feels mistreated. Even if they're mistreated, even if they're abused, they will always be the ones that are apologizing, even when they did not do anything wrong. That is what a peacekeeper does, because they want to keep everything peaceful. So the other type of people pleaser is the performer. So what the performer does is that they do everything they can to seek approval. They want to be perfect, always doing what is available and what is needed for them. So these are the, sometimes you're going to find out that these are the top graders in class, the best employees. They host every party. They don't want to say, they don't want to say no to anything, because they want to do more than humanly possible to remain the top performer and to make sure that everyone around them is happy. So the rescuer is the third type of people pleaser. The rescuer takes responsibility for everyone's problems. The rescuer is going to drop everything to save others, even people who keep making the same mistakes. The rescuer is going to be hurt over and over, but they will still make sure that they take responsibility of even the person that is hurting them. I want to apologize for the dog that is barking. That is not my dog. Otherwise, I would have told the dog to keep quiet. But I'm thinking that, because I want to keep peace with my neighbors, I will not say anything about the dog. But many of us are a mix of all three of these types. I know that there are times that I have worn every hat of these three types of people pleasing at different times, or maybe even all the time. So where does the people pleasing becomes a trap for abuse and exploitation? So here's a painful truth. People pleasers are like magnets of toxic and abusive relationships. Maybe sometimes you've wondered why you continue getting hurt, why you're always hurt, why you're doing good becomes your pain. It is because predators and manipulators know you won't fight back because you're a people pleaser. Even in your family, people pleasers often say, I am exploited, but they don't do anything about it. They are the ones that are always lending money. They are the ones that are always babysitting. They are always helping, but they will deny themselves their needs just to keep peace. Have you ever borrowed money to lend to someone because you want to keep peace? Have you ever borrowed money to help someone because you want to keep peace and you want to remain the good person in the family or even in the relationship? But in the end, they are the ones that are going to bleed the most. The cost on our health, or the cost on your health as a people pleaser. When you're trying to be perfect, when you're trying to avoid conflict, and when you're carrying everyone's burdens, it's going to take a toll on you. I am telling you this from my personal experience. This is not from hearsay. I've also heard people say the same, but I feel like I will be the first witness to tell you that it can take a toll on your health. You know what people pleasing does? You know what being a perfecter or being the rescuer, being the savior of the world is going to lead to? It is going to lead to stress. A lot of stress. We know that from psychology or from research or from biology or from science that too much stress raises our blood pressure. It weakens our immunity. It causes us to have headaches and migraines that are non-stop because you're always thinking about other people's problems. And anxiety. One of the things that I know that I have been anxious about is, oh my gosh, am I gonna do the same? Am I gonna do this the best way? Am I gonna do it in a way that everybody feels, just content? It brings a lot of anxiety in your body, which leads to sleepless nights and racing thoughts and always working because you want to do everything right. The other part is you have your suppressed emotions. People who are people pleaser, they don't always express their emotions. And those suppressed emotions can show up as depression or even physical illness. Sometimes we get surprised when we see that people have either ended their lives or they have harmed themselves, and you start to wonder what happened because that was the most jovial person, that was the most giving person, that was the strongest person. It is because those people that are always wanting to keep peace and to please people and do everything perfect is that they suppress their emotions most of the times. And that's what shows up as depression. And people just keep quiet and they don't talk about their pain. So science confirms that chronic stress and anxiety are directly tied to heart problems, digestive issues, fatigue, and burnout. You don't know how many times I hear these things in the therapy room. People who have stress and people who have a lot of anxiety, and they will say how much they have to do to make sure that they keep peace, or they just remain the top performers, whether it is their job, whether it is in their home. I've given a lot of confession in most of the episodes that I have done, but I feel like most of the times I want to be real because I'm a human being. Let me confess that for years I wanted to host every event. I wanted to be at every gathering. I wanted to be there for everyone in their good and in their bad times. And I made me feel needed. I made myself feel needed. But here is the catch. When my own hard times came, sometimes I felt alone because I'm always expecting people to step up just like I stepped up for them. And maybe I am expecting too much from people. You feel forgotten because people assume the strong don't break. But even the strongest can become the weakest. Hear it from me. That loneliness that's hidden in the cost of being the reliable one is very traumatic. It's scary. People pleasing sometimes can also be an addiction. And I want to talk about this a little bit because I want you to look into the mirror and ask yourself, who am I among the 3 types of people pleasing? So let's anchor for a minute. Okay, why would I call people pleasing as an addiction? I've read many books about people pleasing, or I've listened to a lot of people talk about people pleasing, but it really sounds like an addiction. But I'm not going to say it's an addiction because it's not there in DSM-5. Here is another angle. People pleasing can feel like an addiction. Every yes is like a dose of approval. And like any drug, the high doesn't last. So you chase another yes, you chase another yes, you chase another yes, another favor, another sacrifice, another stretching. It doesn't feel like it's making you feel approved, or it becomes a disease. You keep sacrificing your health, you keep sacrificing your money, you keep sacrificing your peace, even your relationships, just to keep the supply of approval flowing. But like any addiction, recovery is possible. I call myself a recovering people pleaser, and I am not ashamed to say that. I say that many times when I am meeting my clients because I want to tell them that they can also recover. They can also get out of this cycle of people pleasing that is not ending, but it's hurting them. So recovery means that you have to start setting healthy boundaries. You have to start tolerating that not everyone will like what you do and what you say and what you do for them and what you give them. You have to remind yourself daily that my worth is not up for negotiation. My worth is not from what I give or what I give to people, what I say to people, what I do to people. Where is my worth anchored? And I want you to think about that. Breaking free from people pleasing addiction is not that easy, but I want to say it is possible. Let me say where I started from people pleasing. I don't think that it's that long time ago. But by the time I was reaching 50 years, I already knew that people pleasing wasn't very healthy for me. When I started doing or pursuing my licensure to become a therapist, I started to really pay attention to myself. I started by self-awareness, to notice when I was saying yes out of fear and not love. I started noticing that there were not enough boundaries to keep me safe and healthy. So I brought in boundaries. I started practicing to say no, even in small ways. I started honoring my body, self-care. I've talked a lot about going through grief that was really, really very heavy grief. And I will never stop talking about it because my mom was a part of me that, I cannot even explain. So during that time, I realized that if I didn't honor my body and my emotions and how I was feeling, and if I ignored the stress, the grief that I was going through, that these things were multiplied in me and I was not going to get out of it. The other thing that I recognize is that my faith was always and has always been my anchor, but I don't know if I ever practiced to know that faith has to be the key. Jesus taught love, but he also rested. He also said no. There are times he had to withdraw from his disciples and he went to a place, whether to pray or fast. He withdrew from the crowd because he needed that time. We go back to the book of Genesis for those who are Christians, that we know that God had time to create the earth and the people and everything that is on the earth, but he rested. He rested on the day that he knew that he needed that rest. And he was to demonstrate to us that we need the rest. So if you're anchored in your faith, you're going to recognize that even God himself knew that there was a time to rest. So the other thing is support. People who are very strong, people who like to do things for other people, people who are always the leaders, people who volunteer a lot, they need support too. I needed therapy, even though a lot of times I was mentoring people, I was giving people therapy, I was giving people counseling. I needed therapy. I needed somebody, a mentor. I needed somebody, a coach, somebody that could talk to me and tell me, Eunice, this is not safe. I had to, that relationship with a mentor, with a coach, gave me that learning, that understanding that the things that I was doing, some of them were toxic, some of them were patterns that I needed to break. And I want to tell you that this is something that you can do. So, as I said, as a Christian, I believe service and selflessness are beautiful. And obviously we are called to love, but nowhere we are called to burn ourselves to keep others warm. And this is where Anchor Waves is going to help you understand that without an anchor, we're going to drift. When we are not properly anchored, we're going to move by the wind in all directions. We live without ground rules. We say yes to everyone except to ourselves. We say yes even when it hurts. We listen more to others than our own voice. Why? Because deep down, we're still searching for belonging after rejection. But belonging doesn't come from erasing ourselves. Belonging comes when we anchor ourselves in our God-given worth. Your worth doesn't come from how much you're doing for others. Because I want you to reflect. I want you to maybe come to an understanding. For the next 1 week or so, I want you to practice writing. Write down 3 places in your life where you have been saying yes when you wanted to say no. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of? What am I afraid will happen if I say no? The other thing is, you're going to have to start practicing grounding yourself, which is, I would call it anchoring. When conflict or requests come up, pause. Take 3 slow breaths. Okay? And remind yourself, your worth is not up for negotiation. You do your faith check. Reflect on this scripture that talks about love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I hope you notice it doesn't say that love your neighbor instead of yourself. It doesn't say that. So one of the things that I would like you to, maybe even as you evaluate what type of a people pleaser you are, or maybe you're not a people pleaser, I would like you to really look into the relationships that you are in. Because when you're a people pleaser, it's very, very possible for you to ignore red flags. Because abusers thrive in control. So people pleasers, hand over their control to their abuser to avoid conflict. When you believe your worth depends on keeping others happy, you're going to ignore all the red flags. So you explain away bad behavior. You accept mistreatment as normal because you think, if I just try harder, you're going to be loved more. Or if you try harder, or if you give more, or if you even love more, things are going to change, because that's not what happens. As I started by saying, as a child, that, covering for my mom's mistakes, didn't prevent her from being hit. But toxic people don't change because you bend. They change only when they choose to. And you are not the person that is supposed to go changing everybody, especially adults. You can help change your children's behavior by redirecting them, but adults can be very hard to change adults. It doesn't, and this doesn't just happen in family, or, it happens even in romantic relationships. It happens in your job. I've heard people say that, they have been exploited by their colleagues or their supervisors or their bosses. People feel used, but they don't know how to get out of out of those chains. Often those individuals are the people pleasers. The ones who keep bending over backwards, helping everyone, denying themselves, and, just calling it peacekeeping. But in reality, is it peace or is it being silenced? Is it going to leave you happy or is it going to leave you hurt? And it's like being the family ATM machine. Everyone knows your PIN and you can never say no. And instead of being appreciated, you end up being drained financially, emotionally, spiritually drained. Science shows that, studies on family dynamics show that individuals with weak boundaries are far more likely to be financially and emotionally and physically exploited by relatives, because they confuse sacrifice with love. And that's the trap of people pleasing. You give until you're empty, whether it is in your romantic relationship or your family or your co-workers. Somehow you still are told, nobody's gonna tell you it's enough until you break. And when you break, is who is gonna be there to help you up? Pleasing others can literally make you sick, and emotionally the toll is just as heavy. You lose touch with your own desires, your voice is silenced, and in quiet moments you wonder, who am I apart from what I do for others? Sometimes you can lose your identity in helping others. I'm not saying this that people need to stop helping. By the way, I have sleepless nights thinking about how I'm gonna help. I do have a mission, and I do have a mission 100% that I do volunteering and without a pay. But that doesn't mean that you have to stop doing those things. But remember, if you stopped doing those things, what would happen? If you were sick in bed, what would happen? If you had no mental capacity of doing those things because you're too stressed, or you're too stretched, or you're too broken, who's gonna do those things? So if the toll is that heavy and you feel it, it's time to do that reflection. That kind of reflection that I told you about, because we all need to learn, we all need to move, we all need to change. And who likes change? I don't like change, but I'm recommending change because I've had to make that change to really free myself. So to end today, I want to leave you with this quote by Julie Hames. You must stop pleasing others because those other people literally have no idea who you are. Friends, people pleasing may have been your survival strategy, but it doesn't have to be your life story. You can be anchored, you can serve and love deeply without disappearing. Remember, you are allowed to rest, you are allowed to say no, you are allowed to be loved, and simply be you. So as I wrap up today's episode of Anchor Waves, I want to leave you with this. People pleasing may feel like love, like loyalty, like sacrifice, but when it comes at the cost of your own peace, your health, and your identity, it is not love, it is survival. And survival is not the same as living. Anchoring yourself means learning to say yes with intention and no with confidence. It means respecting your own needs as much as you respect the needs of others. Remember, serving others is beautiful, but you do not need to set yourself on fire. I will repeat that. You do not need to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. I have reflected on myself, and I want you to be reflecting on yourself. Where is it that you have been stretching yourself too much and you are about to break? Until next time, this is Dr. Eunice Menja. I'm reminding you to stay anchored, to stay present, and to stay true. If you like my episode, please share it with someone who might need this information. I would love for you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, to like, comment, because I want to continue sharing with you the information that I come across, and I think it's going to help you because it has helped me. Until next time, take care of yourself.